Back in 2010, Liverpool wasn't just having a bad season, the club was actually hours away from total collapse. The previous owners, Tom Hicks and George Gillett, had basically driven the team into a wall with endless legal fights and massive debts. They even promised a new stadium that never actually happened, and it took a court order just to keep the club from being shut down. When FSG stepped in and paid £300 million, they weren't buying a trophy cabinet, they were inheriting a complete disaster with no clear way to make their money back. If we look at the club 15 years later, the transformation is almost hard to believe. Liverpool brought in £703 million in revenue last year, and Sportico's 2026 list valued the team at over $5.5 billion. They went from the brink of bankruptcy to being the highest earning English club in the Deloitte Money League. It is the same city and the same famous crest, but the financial DNA has been totally rewritten. So how did they pull it off? It comes down to 3 specific decisions that changed everything, and we are going to break them down right now. To really get what FSG accomplished, you have to look at the mess they found on day one. That £300 million price tag sounds like a fortune, but it looks like a lot less when you realize what was hiding under the hood. Hicks and Gillett had borrowed a mountain of cash to buy the team in 2007, and then they did something brutal by dumping all that debt right onto the club's books. This meant Liverpool wasn't just losing money on players, they were stuck paying off the loans their own owners used to buy them. By the time FSG finally won the legal battle to take over, the club was basically broke. The players' wages were swallowing up all the cash, and since they weren't in the Champions League, there was no extra money coming in to save them. The first few years under FSG were intentionally slow and pretty painful for the fans. Their net spending on players stayed around £25 to £30 million a year, which is tiny for a club that wants to be at the top of the league. Between 2010 and 2013, they were spending about 60 or 70 million per season, but the real problem was that they kept wasting it. They spent 35 million on Andy Carroll, and he barely saw the pitch. Then they dropped 20 million on Stuart Downing, only to sell him for pennies 2 years later. Even Mario Balotelli came in for 16 million, and only lasted a single season, proving that the whole way they picked players was completely broken. The business side of things looked even worse than the team on the field. Even though Liverpool had millions of fans across the globe, their commercial income was only £116 million in 2015. To put that in perspective, Manchester United was making almost double that amount at the time. Other clubs with way fewer fans were catching up because Liverpool had a world-class brand but a business that didn't know how to sell a t-shirt. Matchday income was another huge bottleneck for the club. Anfield only brought in £41 million back in 2011 because the stadium was old and could only hold about 45,000 people. Every time the stadium sold out, the club was actually losing money because they didn't have enough seats or modern boxes for the fans who wanted to spend. They had the history and the fans, but the building itself was holding them back. FSG was staring at 3 broken engines. Their scouting was a mess, their brand wasn't making money, and the stadium was too small to grow. Because of the debt they started with, they couldn't just write a massive check to fix it all. They were forced to be disciplined and fix the machine while it was still running, and that's exactly what became their secret weapon. This is where things start to get really interesting, because the 3 big moves FSG made weren't actually that complicated. You don't need a billionaire's bank account to understand them, but you do need the guts to stick with them. Each choice was a structural shift that built up more and more momentum as the years rolled by. The first big move was choosing data over ego. FSG had already seen how John Henry's Boston Red Sox used heavy analytics to take down much richer teams, which is that same Moneyball strategy you might have read about or seen in the movies. They decided to bring that exact same energy to the transfer market. Michael Edwards got the nod as sporting director in 2016, and he teamed up with a data scientist named Ian Graham to build a scouting system that looked for value where everyone else saw nothing. They tracked things like pressing metrics, how many positions a guy could play, and even injury patterns, which are the specific details that old school scouts usually ignore. The proof is right there in the numbers. Back in 2017, Mohamed Salah joined the team for about £37 million, and the media actually called it a risky move because he hadn't played well at Chelsea a few years before. He ended up becoming one of the most prolific scorers in the history of the Premier League. Then you have Andy Robertson, who arrived from Hull City for just £8 million and turned into what many people consider the best left back on the planet. Georginio Wijnaldum cost £25 million and became the engine of a midfield that won both the Champions League and the Premier League title. None of these guys were superstars when they signed, but every single one of them played way above their price tag. When the time came to move players on, Liverpool knew exactly when to cash out. Philippe Coutinho was sold for £142 million in January of 2018, which happened to be the absolute peak of his market value. That one deal alone paid for Virgil van Dijk at $75 million and Alisson Becker at $62 million, and those two became the most important defensive signings the league had seen in years. FSG didn't have to write a single check from their own pockets to make it happen. While the squad value jumped from under $400 million in 2015 to about $1 billion by 2024, the actual net spend stayed way lower than what Manchester City or Chelsea were throwing around. The second decision was treating wage discipline like a weapon instead of a burden. All through the Klopp years, Liverpool kept their wage-to-revenue ratio at about 61%. Even though the official safety guideline for European clubs is 70%, Liverpool never even came close to hitting that limit. That might sound like boring accountant talk, but it has huge consequences on the pitch. It meant the club never handed out panic contracts or let salaries spiral out of control just because a player had a good 6 months. They only made exceptions for players who had proven they were worth it over the long haul. By the 2024 season, their staff costs were $428 million against $700 million in revenue, so the math still worked perfectly. Compared to the clubs that let their spending run wild, this discipline is the only reason Liverpool isn't facing a massive financial crisis right now. The third move was turning Anfield into a machine that pays for itself. They expanded the main stand in 2016 to add 9,000 seats, which gave their matchday income a massive boost right away. Then they finished the Anfield Road End expansion in 2024 to add another 7,000 seats to the stadium. These two projects cost over £100 million. But the owners didn't have to chip in a cent because the club used its own revenue and smart loans to cover the bill. The result was that matchday money went from $41 million a year back in 2011 to $116 million by 2025. That is a £75 million raise every single year, making Liverpool one of only 4 teams in England bringing in over $100 million from ticket sales every season. But making the stadium bigger did more than just sell more tickets, because it actually dragged every other part of the business up with it. More seats meant more luxury boxes and more space for corporate sponsors, and a bigger crowd made the stadium look even better on TV. That energy made the club a magnet for huge brands like AXA and Google Pixel, who wanted to be associated with that atmosphere. Starting in August of 2025, Adidas is taking over as the kit supplier in a deal that should bring in even more cash than the old Nike contract. Commercial revenue shot up from $116 million in 2016 to over $300 million by 2025, which is nearly triple what it was a decade ago. While all this was happening, the bank debt that almost killed the club years ago dropped to just £64 million. Jurgen Klopp was the secret ingredient that made all of these business moves actually work. When FSG hired him, they just wanted him to get the team back into the Champions League, but he did that and so much more. The total value of the club climbed from about $1.2 billion in 2016 to nearly $4 billion by 2023. He wasn't just winning games on the weekend. He was the reason sponsors wanted to sign deals and the reason TV networks paid so much to show the matches. By the end of his run, the coach had basically become the CEO of the entire Liverpool brand. The FSG plan seems like common sense when you look back at it now, so you have to wonder why every other team didn't just do the same thing. If you want the answer to that, you only have to look 10 miles down the road. Back in 2010, Everton was in almost the exact same spot as Liverpool, with a huge history, a loyal fan base, and a total mess of a balance sheet. The big difference was that they didn't have the discipline that FSG brought to the table. Everton spent way more than they earned for years, which led to league penalties and a stadium project that turned into a money pit as the costs kept rising. They are still trying to put out those fires today, while Liverpool is sitting on $700 million in revenue and paying off their debts. Both teams are in the same city and played in the same era, but they ended up in completely different worlds because of the choices made in the boardroom. Manchester United is an even better example because they started this whole period in a much stronger position. United had a bigger brand, more famous players, and way more money coming in from sponsors than Liverpool ever did. But the Glazer family ran the club like a financial experiment instead of a sports team, and they loaded the business with debt while letting the stadium fall behind. Today, Liverpool's bank debt is down to 64 million, while United is still on the hook for hundreds of millions of pounds. The club that was just hours away from going bankrupt in 2010 has actually passed United in terms of growth and momentum. The real gap between these teams isn't about who has the better history or the most famous fans. It comes down to those three decisions that Liverpool stuck to for over 10 years, which were smart recruiting, strict wage limits, and building a stadium that pays its own way. There was no secret billionaire funding the whole thing and no cheating the system. It was just a decade of making the right choices and letting the results stack up. The 2024-25 accounts finally bring this whole story full circle, and the numbers are honestly staggering. Liverpool pulled in £703 million in revenue, which officially makes them the highest earning English club in the Deloitte Football Money League. After 2 years of losses, they finally posted a £15.2 million pre-tax profit, but the real kicker is that Sportico now values the club at $5.74 billion. That is an 18 times return on the £300 million FSG paid back in 2010 when they bought a total mess in a courtroom. None of this happened by accident, because this is exactly what 15 years of sticking to the same three core decisions looks like once the compounding interest finally kicks in. The big takeaway here is that you don't actually need a billionaire writing blank checks to win at the highest level. Success comes down to using smart data, keeping your wage bill under control, and making sure your stadium earns its keep every single week. If you want to see how a club using the exact opposite playbook built a completely different kind of empire, my Manchester City financial breakdown is ready for you right now. So just click the link on your screen.